Okay, I call this meeting of the Arlington County Electoral Board to order at 6 o'clock. Anybody would like to make public comment when that time comes? Let us know. Frank? Anybody? Any hands from the Teams gallery? Okay. The first order of business is to adopt minutes. We have a bunch. I will move that we adopt the minutes from the May 13th. Is that the right date? Our last regular meeting, May 13th. Our canvas meeting, which ran from the 17th, the evening of the 17th through the 21st. The certification meeting we had on June 21st. And our meeting on June 26th, which was just a closed session meeting. Sorry, did I finish that? Did I say I was moving to adopt them in both? Okay.
Yeah, I'll second.
Any discussion? We've corrected all of our typos. Great, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Frank, you're up. Public comment.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking the registrar and election office and the board for another successful election. Very well done. Just two requests for the upcoming election. I mentioned this before. One would be if the election office and the board can ensure that there was enough manpower to ensure that returned mail-in ballots, undeliverable mail-in ballots can be noted and removed from the permanent absentee ballot list, and then mentioned various for steps. The second would be to have preferably an electronic, if not a hard copy of the provisional ballots to each party representative during the provisional ballot meeting as passed. And then third, I'm just curious, I don't know if it'll be discussed today, but I'd be curious to, in terms of the new executive order, the SAVE Act, no, not the Act, SAVE database. I've heard that the states and even local registrars might have access to that in terms of being able to verify without that special identifier number. That was a problem before, to see if that, what the status of that.
Was there anybody that wanted to make comments? Already. Next item is the ADA survey. We just have to certify, I believe, that we completed our survey. And then our secretary can.
So yes, as a reminder, the Department of Elections requires an annual ADA compliance confirmation of every polling location. So every polling location shall be accessible to qualified voters as required by the provisions of the Virginians with Disabilities Act. The Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act relating to public services. So this is so what we do during the primary is we complete our ADA survey leading up to the primary on all of our polling places. And then because some pieces of the ADA checklist can only be done during an election, so we have our election officers help us with completing their extra pieces for us. Things like setting up the curbside voting space and things like that. So after the primary, we have certified that all of our should be ADA compliant. So we just need the electoral board to confirm that we have done this.
I move that we direct the secretary to sign the confirmation and submit it, or request that the
Yes.
general registrar submit
The electoral boards must affirm the annual ADA compliance confirmation statements during a public meeting of the board.
Any further discussion?
I have to say, I have not personally checked out all of these locations, but I think good reason to believe that it has been done thoroughly.
Yeah, and every time we go into a new location, the first thing we do is assess it for accessibility. So. Okay.
All in favor?
I
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next item is the first go at early voting hours for November. Begins in September.
So what we have done is we are proposing the following early voting hours. This mirrors what was done in the 2022 mid-year elections. So essentially, so the normal hours, we have to be open 45 days for election. So it was opening September 19th. And then we would be open 2 Saturdays, October 25th and November 1st, and then 1 Sunday, October 26th. And then we would do extended hours during the week here at courthouse, and then open up our satellite locations as well. And that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, open till 7 p.m. So that is the proposal. Is there any conversation about or questions?
I would move that we adopt the early voting hours as proposed.
second that.
Okay. I will ask a question. Did we eliminate?
Public comment.
It almost sounded like me coming back at me from the. Did we, when we asked the county board to amend the ordinance, did we remove law completely?
Yeah.
Or just for June?
I think we removed it.
That saves the problem of were we gonna use Long Bridge for
Yeah,
the governor's election?
yeah.
Problems up? That was my only question.
Yeah, it's one of those, so we're caught between, the reason our office first started using satellite early voting locations was because we were just at capacity at courthouse. You can only physically put so many voters through this building on a Saturday. So from the offices, historically from the office's perspective, the extra sites are simply to reduce demand on this office. And so.
I have been here on the final Saturday of the presidential election, and I agree there's a point at which you just cannot.
Yeah, we cannot meet the demand for, like I said, what we saw in 2022, and we anticipate a similar turnout to the 2022 election. And there were no real limitations with anyone. Obviously, we're always busy that last Friday and Saturday. But there's nothing we can do to help voters come earlier in the process. So.
I was not on the board in 2021. Normally, I would think we would use as the comparison, but I gathered in 2021, we didn't have the 45 days early voting.
No, we still had 45 days. We moved to no excuse absentee voting in 2020. So, yeah, the governors and the midterms are really comparable elections. So, yeah. Because early voting has been trending upwards, they usually go to the last, yeah. But like I said, if the sites and hours work for 2022, once again, if we're thinking about it from a crowd management perspective, then there's no reason to think that the sites that we have and the hours that we have wouldn't also work for this year's governor's race. And again, from a service standpoint, it's a different conversation, but
I'm actually fine with these.
Anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next is our strategic plan update. For purposes of discussion, I will move that the board and in its capacity as the chairs of the various working groups submit a draft to be discussed at the September meeting. I don't know the date on that precisely. Anybody have a calendar?
Does it need to be a motion? Can it just
I
be-
don't know. I think parliamentarily it does, but for now, we can, that's to serve as a discussion. We don't necessarily need to. I was oh, sorry, I made the motion, but
All right, well, I second it.
thank you.
September 9th. is
Okay.
the Second Tuesday in September.
I understand that my colleagues are much more on the ball than I have been with my communications subgroup. Although I have had a meeting of that working group, I am planning one more for next Tuesday, after which I will start drafting. I'm happy to do this at, like, discuss in August if you guys are, but okay. We will be discussing sort of like a public comment for everyone. We will be discussing the fourth and final part of the strategic plan, which has to do with facilities and primarily the warehouse facility, which has security concerns, and so will be done in closed session. But then the various groups can then draft up something. And then we can circulate and discuss in September. I don't know that, like I said, I don't know that we need to approve a formal motion, because the plan is not a formal thing until we formally adopt it, but a question for my colleagues, which would be, do we want to circulate make the draft publicly available prior to the meeting, whenever we've finished sort of our drafting, and sort of leave it out there with the idea that if anybody would like to comment, provide feedback, they can. We make.
I would think after the September.
And then we can do the final approval.
If you don't mind. I would love to attend.
You may, Tanya, can you make your to
Yeah, what date are you said?
next Tuesday at 6 is the proposal.
Please add me to attend as
So Tanya, could you please notice a public meeting of the
Yeah.
board for Tuesday, the 15th, for the purpose of discussing the strategic plan? We have now.
Well, the ones who had two members. I would say what normally we do is it's only if they're discussing business. So as long as one doesn't talk, then they're not discussing business.
Yeah, my intent was to, yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't, it never hurts to say that the board will be having a.
Yeah.
public
And
meeting.
then anyone can attend.
I will try to limit the commentary to come from the people who participated in the first set of working group sessions, although if people who didn't participate in those join, certain people can join the working group. So I might withdraw my motion, since I don't believe we need it to approve it. So our next item of business is our post-election report, for which I will turn floor over to Gretchen.
Yes, so once again, after each election, we like to compile just a quick report about some statistics about the election. So as you can see, voters in Arlington are still choosing to vote on election day, with mail and early voting sharing almost equal slices of the pie. We did see 16% of active voters participating in the election. That is let's see, on page 3 of the report, we have historical comparisons. And so, and we've compared it to the 2013, 2017, and 2021 governors of primaries. But those had the office of governor on the ballot. So 16% for not having the office of governor on the ballot is considered high by some experts in the state, from what I've read. Let's see. Early voting, like I said, is split pretty evenly. I mean, once again, we don't determine statistical significance on any of these numbers. So, but we had 707 vote at Walter Reed and 877 vote at Madison. So that means those locations are doing a pretty good job of evenly pulling voters from our courthouse location from other parts of the county. We did mail 11,647 ballots out. 9,823 were for what's called the permanent absentee ballot list. That's the list that voters can sign up for to get a ballot for every election. And they would have indicated that they wanted to vote in Democratic primary elections. We counted 5,407 of those. And then we had, so most people who are getting their mail ballots are choosing to vote by mail. The number that are exchanging to vote in person was only 149. So it's a pretty small slice of the pie.
What do you think happened to the 4,000 that didn't get voted or returned? Maybe they were returned.
It's a good question. You would be, I think, most voters would be surprised by, it's not uncommon for us to get ballots in November from the primary election. So voters are just keeping them in their drawer, I guess. It's like mail can be problematic. So we did have, I wish voters in Arlington knew not to put their ballot in a mailbox in Arlington County on the Monday before an election, because it's just like some do make it to us, but a lot don't make it to us. So there were another like couple hundred that came in like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the week like after the election that we couldn't count. But yeah, it's hard to know what happens to the ones that are sent out that, yeah.
Or they just decided.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah, because a lot of times when people get the ballot, they're like, I don't know who these people are. I mean, just because they signed up to get a ballot for every election doesn't mean they want to vote in every election. Once again, we don't know why. We would have to do a survey with them afterward, but their likelihood of responding to that survey is low, seeing as they can't respond with their ballot. So
The PAB people.
Yeah.
Those are only people who are here in Arlington. So.
Yeah, so to
Ocala
be-
voters are not
Correct.
on the.
Yeah. So to be on the permanent absentee ballot list, you can only have the ballot mailed to your residence address here in Arlington. So anybody who's residing
Meaning
overseas,
the address we have you registered at.
where they're residing, and it's where their residence address is for their voter registration purposes. So anybody who is residing overseas, we do have a number of voters who reside overseas because of State Department or military or other. They are not eligible to be on the permanent absentee ballot list because they're overseas. They cannot get their ballot if it's mailed to their house here in Arlington. So. Anyway.
Anything else of note?
And do we have any other slides, Tanya, or was that? Yeah, nothing really else of note from this election. Once again, like it was as we say in the office, a pretty unremarkable, and that everything basically was as expected.
Basically, I think in terms of trying to project how many precincts we'll need in the future, important for us to be able to have a rough idea of how many people person in future elections, because if they're voting in person, that means more polling places. it seemed to me that in the presidential election in November, a significant majority of the voters did not vote on election day, which obviously
Correct.
is that day. This election, about certainly more than half of the people who voted voted on election day, or yeah, more than half anyway.
Yeah,
And is that just because primaries tend to be a day that people vote in person, or is that a trend suggesting we will have more election day voting in the future?
so it's hard to make, once again, we want to look at trends. So that's where we're look at election to election to election, rather than one election isn't necessarily wrong with how the county's going. But I would say primaries, it's not, a lot of people think that they can avoid the line if they vote early. They don't want to vote at their precinct on election day to quote unquote avoid the line. We don't really have lines at precincts on election day because we have so many people voting before election day. But in a primary, a lot of people know that turnout's low in a primary. The likelihood of them encountering a line at their neighborhood polling location is extremely low on a primary election day. We also have that sometimes people don't find out about primary elections until it is right up on them because the news stories. So in a general election, you have two major political parties, both trying to encourage turnout. So people are hearing about the election everywhere they go. I don't know how anybody in Arlington could like walk or drive down a sidewalk without knowing there's an election going on. But for whatever reason, people seem to be surprised. So they don't do as much like pre-planning for primaries as they do for November elections. But I have a feeling we'll be back up to what we saw in the presidential. We'll be back up to that in the general. So
What's funny is that the people who showed up last November on that Saturday before the election to vote early probably would have suffered a shorter line had they waited until Tuesday to the precinct. I mean, the precincts usually have, like, some of them were waiting probably 20 or 30 minutes because they just got.
Yeah.
bonkers.
yeah, I would say, I mean,
So they in fact didn't beat the line. They actually,
yeah, no, the worst days to vote early in Arlington County are that last Friday and last Saturday. Choose a Wednesday afternoon for the 6 weeks leading up to the election if you want to avoid the line. Yeah.
right. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you.
I just want to say, first of all, thank the election staff for another fine, well-run election. I'd be remiss, however, if I didn't point out that these results kind of confirm my previously stated view that the decision for the electoral board to run its own private mail service is not the best use of our resources. I note that we have, I guess, a total of 1,200 people who dropped off ballots in drop boxes, in the 9 drop boxes that we have, and about half of those were dropped off in the 10 days before the election, so that there were only about 600 ballots that were dropped off in the first 35 days of before the election. Which, so if you figure 9 boxes times 35 days, there was on average less than 2 that were put per box for that period of time. So I would hope that we would consider for future elections limiting the drop boxes, as I've suggested before, to the period 10 days before the election. It's, I don't think, a major issue. I don't see any indication that that the drop box ballots are not being picked up accurately, and that anybody's trying to stuff drop boxes. But I do think that given that voters already have the option of 54 election places to drop off their ballots on election day in person, plus they can mail in their ballots to the local post office, that might want to consider in the future reducing the number of days that we send 2 individuals to each of the 9 drop boxes around the county.
Anything else?
Yeah, for anybody who the data that Rich was referencing was on page 7. So, Billing.
Just a comment, I saw the comment in here about the supervised camera. Ballots are under 24/7 surveillance, and that's true. But if we're going to say, I don't know, they would only be looked at in the case of some sort of emergency or some sort of a contentious situation, right? It's not like somebody's looking.
We are not paying an employee to monitor 9 Dropbox cameras for 43 days straight around the clock.
Right. So in reality, there's probably nobody looking at any of the videos, except maybe that they.
But they are anybody who comes or goes past the Dropbox, they are being recorded by video. So saying that they are.
And
under
somebody
video
visits that box once a day. If anything is wrong with the box, we're gonna go back and look at the video.
And they do. So if we catch.
The idea that the video is just going off into the abyss is wrong. I understand like the contention about the drop boxes, but I will say something now because it keeps coming up and I would like it to go away. The cheapest solution is not the best solution. The cheapest way to run an election would be for everybody to vote by mail and put it in a mailbox. Get rid of the drop boxes, get rid of election day precincts, have no in-person voting because it is cheaper. The amount of money per ballot that was spent in this primary is enormous because each of those precincts had 4 or 5 people in it who get paid $250 to $300 each. And some of them had 100 people show up. So it's a lot of money that goes into an election. I personally have a problem with the post office because the post office isn't under surveillance 24/7. They have had problems in the past. We don't always hear about them until months after an election. If something happens to one of those drop boxes, we'll find out within 24 hours. We can tell people if you dropped off your ballot in that drop box within the last 24 hours, we need to talk to you because it may have been compromised. We know if people are doing anything to the drop boxes. We don't know what they're doing to mailboxes. We don't know what postal workers are doing. They're not required to have 2 people pick up ballots. We are. I'm willing to say that the cost of the drop boxes and the cost that we incur to send people to pick them up is not significant enough to increase the insecurity element. Part of what we pay for in election is a security element. And if we could make elections more secure, we would pay more money for that. I would assume that we're not just here for a cheaper election experience, because there are ways to do that that would actually decrease the security of elections. So I don't mind that we have 9 drop boxes. I understand the concept of limiting them to the last 10 days. I think the regularity that is created by how we tend to run things in Arlington is good. Because it prevents, I mean, my colleagues can attest to having heard discussions at Vivo where, you know, Fairfax and Chesterfield counties are, see how we fit that whole early voting schedule on one slide? They're sending out pages of documentation because yes, they have more locations, but every location has different hours. And every election, they change the hours for this place and that place. We have generally spent our time keeping everything the same from election to election, even if it means underutilization in some cases, because it means that people, yes, people will not show up, you know, 3 weeks or 4 weeks out from an election to a drop box and go, what the hell? Why is it locked? Like, why can't I drop my my ballot off? You'd be surprised how much people don't pay attention. You get at least what? Even in a primary, a dozen or 2 dozen people that show up here on election day, not to ask where their polling places are, but to say like, I want to vote. Well, but there's no voting here. Yes, but I voted here last time. Maybe you did early, but not on election day. Like, so the more regularity we have, the better. I am hesitant to have a scenario that turns into Fairfax or Chesterfield where this election, we're gonna have the drop boxes open for 10 days. Maybe in November, we would want them open for 21 days because it's gonna be higher turnout. And then nobody remembers what they're supposed to do and they get to one of those drop boxes. It's locked up. And then we get a complaint about how we're doing something wrong or doing something illegal, and there's complaints about that issue. Part of what we do, part of what everybody does, is sometimes avoiding getting yourself in that sort of legal trouble or potentially legal trouble, so that we don't have to defend what we're doing, even if it's perfectly legal and perfectly above board, and I could go to court and defend it all day. You just don't want to. Like there's no there's no upside to doing it. So I know people don't love the 9 drop boxes. We've had conversations about how to deal with that. 10 days would probably indeed reduce the amount of money we spend, but my guess is it's not actually as much as we think it is. A lot of it is opportunity cost in that those people are shifted from doing other things that they might do for that, hour and a half? I don't even know what the circuit takes. We've had the discussion about whether we should cut back to 3 boxes. That would probably save very little money because you're still going to wind up with a circuit around the county. Because the county board down the block isn't going to let us entirely dictate which of those boxes go. Like, they're going to want one in South Arlington. They're going to want one probably to stay up in North Arlington. And so you're going around the entire county once a day anyway. So why not stop at the other 6? Most of the cost of these is the sunk cost of having them in the first place, having bought them. What's the lifespan of them?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, it didn't come with a warranty.
I'm not even talking about the warranty, but like what's like our voting systems have a 10-year lifespan.
Yeah.
We have this situation,
Yeah.
where we expect them to last 10 years. I don't know, maybe these last 10 years, maybe the last 20 years. The question of whether they should stay or go is probably best left to a distinct change in voting behavior and or the degradation of the boxes to the point where we decide whether or not to replace them. And maybe at that stage you decide you're only going to replace 3 of them. And we're going to do things differently at that stage. But I would like to probably see a general drop in the amount of mail ballots coming in entirely, that people shift much more in a November election back to election day voting. And that 20% wedge that I think we've generally seen in November
Yeah, I
elections,
just think it's gonna.
mail is 20%, pretty
Yeah.
much stays regular at 20%, whereas early in election day may
Yeah,
jigger around, but that stays fairly consistent at 20%, unless that's going to shrink noticeably. And or the law changes to a point where we go back to a more excuse absentee. So
yeah,
probably
we're
no
gonna
excuse,
have the
right.
permanent absentee ballot list.
Right, or even forget the permanent absentee ballot, but that people cannot request, that we go back to a system where you have to be over 65 or disabled or out of town, or, even if it's a more expansive list of excuses, that it's not just, I don't feel like having to go to my polling place on election day. So I can get a mail ballot. So,
I think, well, we were seeing increases in vote by mail, but as you noted, it has seemed to have leveled off to being about 20%. So I think that is just how many voters in Arlington, about 20% of voters in Arlington prefer to vote by mail.
so that's my,
I honestly feel drop boxes anyway. And I say that because our last divisional ballot meeting, some ballots that weren't postmarked, which is a problem because we don't have any way of proving that the post office did its due process to make sure that they canceled that registration so that we knew we actually.
and those don't get counted.
Yeah.
Because that has to establish what the postmark is. There's no presumption in the law of regularity.
Yeah, I will say the number of voters that do respond, Frank, to your point about undeliverables, when we do contact voters, the number of voters that do respond saying I've moved out of state, like we are finding more voters by just mailing them a ballot than we are in any other system we use. So
So you were, this time were you able to?
it's no, like I said, we do our best.
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of those, I'm not gonna say we do, I can't say we do 100% of every ballot because that would be lying. Anybody who says that's probably not being honest. But we do our best to, like I said, any undeliverables that come in on election day might not get cataloged correctly. But when we contact these voters, a bulk of the undeliverables that we get are from that initial mail out when 9,800 ballots went out in that first mailing. So we had them back within 10 days of mailing them out. And so they're all getting logged. We're contacting them. So they get mailed a letter. If we have an email, we'll email them. I'm returning like, hey, we got your ballot back. Did you move? And so the amount of voters, the people that respond to notices saying, I no longer am in the state, and we can then remove them. Like I said, coming from these mail voters, that's by far the most number that we get in a system that we're running. So, yeah.
I know the state ran its process.
State just ran a national change of address
I
list
got-
maintenance
and-
process.
And even though I'd already updated my voter registration record, I still got
Yeah.
a notice from the state saying,
Yeah.
please respond so that we don't make you an inactive voter.
Every voter got that?
No, it's only,
I moved in April. And so, and put in a change of address. And so those all go from the post office to the state.
so the state runs they're doing it twice a year right now. Any voter who's filed a change of address request with the post office, when you do that, you get entered into something called the National Change of Address Database. And so any voter who's filed a change of address gets mailed a notice saying, hey, we think you've moved. Do you live at your old address, your new address? And do you want us to, depending on where they've moved to, update your registration, cancel your registration? And anybody who we don't hear back from in 30 days, that's when they get made inactive. So,
I did
that-
not spend the state's money on
mailing it back.
the postage paid envelope. I brought my notice in and said, do you need me to fill this out or am I okay? But
Anyway,
you know,
but it's a lot, it's like I said, it's a robust process. Once again, you're never gonna have a voter list that's 100% accurate, because by the time I've said that, I've had 3 people move out of Farmington. So I don't know the stats on that, but
we have one more thing before we go to closed session. I will note as part of the first announcement will be, we have no business planned once we come back from closed session, except for our formalities of certifying. So anybody that doesn't want to sit through that, there's a bunch of things that are going to be talked about in closed session. So once we're done with announcements, feel free to drop off the call, or it's not pouring, take your window of opportunity before the rains come back. Announcements.
So I have election law changes. So obviously July 1st, the new laws went into place across Virginia. The only one that's really of note is they've shifted back the deadline to register to vote. It used to be 21 days for a general election or primary. It is now 10 days. And that is an effort to reduce the number of same-day registrations that offices were getting. I believe the General Assembly might have done it for other reasons, but
Can you repeat that question again?
the voter registration deadline, it
Oh.
used to be 21 deadlines,
Okay.
21 days. Now it's 10 days. And so any voter in Virginia can update their voter registration up until 10 days before an election. At 10 days, we do what's called closing the books, which is an archaic term that used to be, we actually had, there was actually a book of registered voters for every precinct, and the precinct registrar would close their books, seal it, and deliver it to the electoral board to conduct the election. And that would be the list of registered voters allowed to vote in that election. That make sense? That's the
You
only,
can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that part of the reason it was 21 days was the court and or the state also involved in checking and
no, so.
cross-checking, and so by the time you did that, you
No.
needed the 21 days to do the work.
So the 21 day, so there was, before we had online voter registration, there would always be a surge of paper voter registration applications right at the deadline, which then had to be sorted. You can register to vote at any office, and so Fairfax County voter could drop off their registration here, but we can't process it. We would have to get that registration to Fairfax. And so you needed that 21 days literally to sort through all these stacks of paper. In 2004, Linda said like a table this size was just filled with voter registration applications stacked to here. She'd never seen so many applications. So it just took 21 days to sort through it, get them entered. And then the poll books, we were still on paper poll books. They had to be printed in Richmond. So you literally had people driving to Richmond the weekend before the election to pick up their paper poll books. Because even printing the paper poll book for Arlington now under modern circumstances takes 13 hours that Sunday before the election. So it was a huge logistical effort, which is why I believe a 21-day voter registration window was needed.
Yes, but many of those things have been cut down upon or eliminated. 10 days is more than enough for us to do what needs to be done.
It's more than adequate for Arlington County.
And I believe, I don't know if Viva took a position or VRAP took a position, but I think there was a sort of push on our parts to say, hey, you push this deadline a little bit without interfering with the ability to get all the stuff done.
Yeah.
Before election day, it may cut back on some of the same.
Yeah,
things.
it doesn't impact, like it still logistically doesn't impact us. Better for the voters, arguably.
More people will come in during early voting and realize that they need to
Update their names or their address.
do a change, and it won't be, well, now you're a provisional voter, because we can't do that because the votes are closed.
I have to say though that I certainly hope that they are correct. This reduce the number of fake registrations. I'm
not optimistic either. So, because to go back, if the goal is to reduce the number of same-day registration provisional ballots that we have in a November election, well, when I looked at, because Dominic asked me to look at the stats, when I went back and looked at, so 50% of our same-day registrations were before election day, 50% on election day. Of those 50% before election day, only like a quarter of them were done prior to 10 days before the election. Because it turns out somebody who procrastinates with their voter registration also procrastinates in voting within the last 10 days of the election. So, yeah.
So what you're talking about is a quarter of the 50%.
Yeah.
12% of, so a couple of thousand is still, from November, it would be.
It was like
500.
400.
Yeah, so, I mean.
So I'm with
that's
you.
not nothing.
I'm with you, Rich.
Right. But
Anyway.
I will say that I am sure some of the loudest people, or I could actually probably predict who one of the loudest persons was, which was probably Kate Hanley in Fairfax, because they have a bazillion more
So
things
many.
of everything. So, an extra 11 days cuts down on probably a couple thousand for them.
The other announcement is we are conducting third-party voter registration drive training. So anybody who does want to register voters in Virginia does need to be recertified each year. So we are conducting a training in conjunction. We were invited by the League of Women Voters of Arlington and Alexandria. So we'll be doing that on Sunday. So if anybody was interested, they can sign up through the League of Women Voters. Or if there are any organizations that do third-party voter registration drive, we're happy to come out and do a training with your organization as well. Oh, and then we will be at the Arlington County Fair on, what are the dates on that again?
13th and 17th.
August.
Be in the indoor part, which is open that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so 15, 16.
and 17th.
We have some
Do we have to pay a fee to have a spot?
at the Arlington County Fair. No. We do not
We're the
pay.
government.
The Arlington Historical Society.
Yeah, we'll have that conversation offline, where I'll explain how it, yeah, so we will have some exciting activities for anybody who wants to come test their knowledge on,
I'll be there.
On voter
I'll volunteering at the table.
yeah.
The next meeting is.
Do you want to do the second Tuesday in August? August 12th.
Oh, no, I will. Then our next meeting is August 12th.
Pending confirmation with everybody's schedules.
Question. Are you going to send out another, all the officers about their availability at the same time, giving them the option to affiliate?
We will be sending out, or will we be sending out an email about their availability for?
We will be sending out a identical form to the form we sent out this year, which has the identical question with the same thing.
Changing things is hard.
It is, and I don't want to. I will if the board directs.
Well, so we will just update the dates.
Won't start assignments till September.
If I would like to get it out at the end of July. I'm gonna say it's probably gonna go out around the time of the next board meeting.
That's because we have some trainings scheduled for the end of July. August. Okay, that's it. That's all I got.
Betty, does anyone else have any announcements? When is the, I have a question / announcement, when is that? The library's voting,
Oh, yeah, we should,
voting rights act?
yeah, we
Is
should.
that coming up in August?
The exhibit, I think, starts in August or like mid-August. That's fine.
So,
Shockingly, we're already at a point where it makes sense to talk about the mailbox.
yeah, so in case, the library is planning an exhibit celebrating, was it 60 years since the Voting Rights Act passed? So you can look forward to more information about that in August.
And we did say we were part of the sponsor
Yes,
pile.
we will have some old voting equipment on display.
That's one of the old.
Well,
lever machines.
no, only the demo lever machine.
Oh.
Nobody wants to pay to have the full lever machines put on display.
And.
Yeah.
Lever machine.
I'd be happy to put them up and on display somewhere.
If there are no other announcements, then I will give you a copy of this.
Thank
So,
Thank you.
because you're gonna lose it. There's a lot. I move that the board do now go into closed session for several purposes. First, to discuss our annual voting system security plan, which is required by code, as well as the security aspects related to the strategic plan for particularly the warehouse facility. Both of those are pursuant to Virginia Code 2.23711 A34 and 24.2625.1B. We'll also discuss the procurement of new voting systems, including vendor proprietary information that is exempt from disclosure pursuant to Code 2.23705.6, paragraph 3. And third, we will complete the annual general registrar performance review that is required by Code Section 24.2-109.1, which is exempt from open meetings rules by Code Section 2.23711A1. Pursuant to Virginia Code 2.23712F, the board requests that the general registrar, Mr. Reinmeyer, be present for the closed meeting to assist the board in its consideration of the 3 items mentioned. And that also the principal deputy director of elections, Ms. Myers, attend the portion of the session regarding voting system procurement.
I second that.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? We are now in closed session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I forgot, we were
Oh,
saying,
yeah.
then I forgot to post it. We'll do it another night, yeah.
Okay.
All right, it is.
6:50. Sorry, that was a long.
There we go.
Okay.
That is what I need to do. There we go.
All right, it's 8:10. I move that the board reconvene in open session and certify pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2 3712 that only the matters listed in the motion to go into closed session were discussed in the closed session, and only matters that were properly discussed in a closed session. I will put that in. Were discussed.
I second that.
Anybody have any notes that we violated our closed session obligation, which is apparently the procedure is this is where you put those up. Then, Madam Secretary, would you call the vote?
Mr. Schwindler,
Aye.
Mr. Fan,
Aye.
and Mr. Fuller, aye.
The motion passes. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Any? Sorry, this is not a debatable motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned, 8:11. Thank you. Sorry, that was one of our